The arrow pierced Evangeline's shoulder with a sickening thud, spinning her off her horse and into the rocky creek bed below. Blood bloomed across her torn dress as Shawnee war cries echoed through the Pennsylvania wilderness, and she knew with crystal clarity that she was about to die at 19 years old. 3 days' ride from Fort Necessity. From the tree line came a sound that made even the warriors pause, a roar of pure fury that seemed to shake the very mountains. A figure emerged from the shadows like death incarnate, standing nearly 7 feet tall with wild black hair and a beard that hadn't seen shears in decades. In his massive hands, he wielded a tomahawk that sang through the air with deadly precision. Tobias Ravencrest had been watching the attack unfold, blind, every instinct screaming at him to remain hidden as he'd done for 23 years. But when he saw the girl fall, saw the warriors closing in for the kill, something primal and long buried exploded within his chest. The first Shawnee warrior never saw the blade that took his head clean off. The second managed to scream before Tobias's hunting knife found his heart. The remaining 3 fled into the forest, their courage evaporating in the face of the mountain man's legendary savagery. Don't touch me," Evangeline gasped as Tobias knelt beside her, his enormous hands hovering uncertainly over her wounded shoulder. Up close, his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they held a haunted quality that spoke of unspeakable loss. "You're bleeding to death," Tobias said, his voice rusty from years of speaking only to himself and the occasional trapper. "That arrow needs to come out." I said, "Don't touch me." Evangeline tried to crawl away, leaving a trail of crimson in the creek bed. You're him, the one they tell stories about. The mountain man who went mad after ... after what?" Attawada demanded, but he knew what she'd heard. Every settlement from Virginia to the Great Lakes whispered the tale of Tobias Ravencrest, the frontiersman who'd lost his wife and daughter to a Huron raid in 1760 and vanished into the wilderness, merging only as a ghost story told around campfires. "After you killed your own family," Evangeline finished, her green eyes blazing with fever and fear. The words hit Tobias like a physical blow. For 23 years he'd lived with the truth of that terrible night, how he'd arrived home too late, how he'd found his beloved Constance and little Mary butchered in their cabin, how he'd failed them utterly. But to hear the lies, the twisted version of events that painted him as the monster, ... "I never killed them," he said quietly, his massive frame trembling with suppressed emotion. "I couldn't save them, but I never hurt them," Evangeline studied, his face seeing something there that gave her pause. The arrow in her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, and dark spots were beginning to dance at the edges of her vision. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Save me." Without another word, Tobias lifted her as gently as if she were made of spun glass, carrying her toward the hidden cave that had been his home for more than 2 decades. As consciousness faded, Evangeline felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek and wondered if she was making the greatest mistake of her short life. Or perhaps, she thought as darkness claimed her, she was finally finding salvation in the most unlikely of places. Evangeline awoke to the scent of wood smoke and something savory bubbling in a pot. Pain lanced through her shoulder as she tried to sit up, and she found herself lying on a bed of soft furs in a cave that had been transformed into something almost civilized. Shelves carved into the rock walls held books, tools, and what looked like medical supplies. Fire crackled in a natural stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Easy now," came Tobias's deep voice from across the cave. He approached slowly, as if she were a wounded deer that might bolt at any moment. "The arrow came out clean, but you've lost a lot of blood." Evangeline looked down to find her shoulder professionally bandaged, her torn dress replaced by a man's hunting shirt that hung nearly to her knees. Panic flared in her chest. "Did you, when you changed my clothes, did you... ... The question, but Tobias understood. "I kept my eyes closed," he said simply. "Haven't looked upon a woman's form since my Constance. Wouldn't dishonor her memory or you by starting now." Something in his tone made Evangeline believe him. She studied his face more carefully now, seeing past the wild hair and mountain man exterior to the intelligent eyes and gentle hands. This wasn't the monster from the stories? What happened to them? She asked quietly. "Your wife and daughter?" Tobias's jaw tightened, but he didn't turn away. Huron war party. I'd gone to Fort Duquesne for supplies. Was supposed to be back by sundown. Got delayed helping another family whose wagon broke down. He stared into the fire, lost in memory. Found them 3 days later. Constance had hidden Mary in the root cellar, but they found her anyway. I'm sorry, Evangeline whispered, meaning it. 23 years I've been up here, telling myself it was penance, that I deserved to be alone because I failed them. Tobias turned to look at her, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. But seeing you fall today, watching those warriors, close in, I couldn't fail again? Over the following days, as Evangeline recovered, she learned that Tobias Ravencrest was nothing like the legend. He was educated, having attended William and Mary College before the frontier called to him. His cave was filled with books on medicine, philosophy, and natural science. He'd become the most skilled tracker and hunter in the Pennsylvania wilderness. Not through savagery, but through patient observation and respect for the natural world. You could have been anything, Evangeline said one evening, as they shared a meal of venison stew. A doctor, a professor, a gentleman farmer. Choose this life. Because I loved her too much to live anywhere she couldn't be, Tobias replied. This was our dream, to build a life in the wilderness, raise our children free from the constraints of civilization. After I lost them, I couldn't bear to be around other people's happiness. Evangeline felt her heart breaking for this gentle. Giant Hood punished himself for a tragedy that was never his fault. And now, Tobias met her gaze across the flickering firelight. Now I find myself remembering what it feels like to want to protect something precious again. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Evangeline felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire, while Tobias found himself memorizing the way the light played across her auburn hair. I should take you back to the settlements, he said finally. Have family who'll be worried. My parents died of fever last winter, Evangeline admitted. I was traveling to Lancaster to live with my aunt. She's probably given me up for dead by now. Then you have somewhere to go, a life to live. Evangeline looked around the cave that had become more home to her in a week than anywhere she'd lived since her parents' death. What if I don't want that life anymore? Dud. The question hung between them like a challenge and a promise, all at on 3 weeks past, like a dream wrapped in autumn mist. Evangeline's shoulder healed clean and strong, but she showed no inclination to leave the mountain sanctuary that had become their private world. Each day brought new revelations about the man who'd saved her, his vast knowledge of herbs and healing, his ability to read the forest like a beloved book, the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't watching. You're staring again. Evangeline teased one morning as she helped him prepare medicinal salves from plants he'd gathered. They worked side by side at his rough-hewn table, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same ingredient. Tobias jerked back, as if burned, his massive frame going rigid. I shouldn't. It's not proper for me to. To. What? To look at me like I'm something precious. Evangeline stepped closer, close enough to see the war raging in his pale blue eyes. Tobias, when was the last time you allowed yourself to feel anything but grief? I can't, he whispered, backing away until his shoulders hit the cave wall.
I won't betray Constance's memory.
I won't let myself care for someone I might lose. You think loving me would betray her? Evangeline's voice was gentle, but unwavering. Or are you afraid that loving me might mean you're finally ready to forgive yourself? The words hit their mark. Tobias slumped against the stone wall, looking every one of his 46 years. She was everything good in this world, Evangeline. Pure and kind and trusting. She believed I could protect her from anything. And I believe you can protect me too, Evangeline said, placing her small hand flat against his chest. But more than that, I believe you're worthy of being protected in return. Worthy of being loved. That afternoon, disaster struck with the suddenness of a mountain storm. A hunting party from Lancaster arrived at the base of Tobias's mountain, led by a hard-faced man named Captain Mordecai Blackthorne, who claimed to be searching for a missing woman. We know you have her, Ravencrest. Blackthorne's voice echoed off the canyon walls. The girl who was taken during the Indian attack. Send her down, and we'll leave you be. From their hidden vantage point, Evangeline watched 8 armed men spread out below. How did they find us? Someone tracked the blood trail from the creek, Tobias said grimly, his hands checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. They must have followed it to the base of the mountain. I'll go down to them, Evangeline decided. Tell them I chose to stay here. End this peacefully. Like hell. You will. Tobias's voice carried the authority of a man who'd faced down war parties and lived to tell about it. You don't know Blackthorn. He's got a reputation for taking what he wants, willing or not. And he's got a bounty on my head from the territorial. Governor, $500 for the mad mountain man who's been terrorizing the frontier. Then we run. Go deeper into the wilderness. Tobias shook his head. I'm done running, Evangeline. Done hiding from life because I'm afraid of losing it. He turned to face her, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not the haunted grief she'd grown accustomed to, but fierce, protective determination. Besides, where would we go that you'd be safe from men like Blackthorn? As if summoned by his words, Blackthorn's voice boomed again. We know you're up there, Ravencrest. Send down the girl or we're coming up. You've got until sunset.
Out.
Felt ice form in her stomach? How many bullets do you have? Enough, Tobias said, though his expression suggested otherwise. The bullets won't solve this problem. These men think they're rescuing you from a monster. They'll keep coming until one of us is dead. Then we make them understand that I'm here by choice. And if they don't believe you, Evangeline moved to the cave entrance, looking down at the men who'd come to save her. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the peaks, promising a bitter night ahead. Then, she said quietly, we show them what happens when someone threatens. What we've built here. The attack came at midnight during a driving rain that turned the mountain paths treacherous as ice. Tobias had expected Blackthorn to wait for dawn, but the captain was craftier than anticipated. Using the storm as cover for his assault, the first shot shattered the silence, echoing through the cave as a musket ball sparked off the stone entrance. Tobias returned fire immediately, his long rifle barking death into the darkness where he'd seen the muzzle flash. Stay low, he commanded Evangeline, who crouched behind the heavy wooden table they'd overturned for cover. No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you. I'm not helpless, Evangeline protested, gripping the loaded pistol he'd given her. I can shoot as well as any man. I know you can, Tobias said, reloading with the swift precision of long practice. But I've already lost one woman I love to violence. I won't lose another. The confession hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before another volley of shots forced them both back into cover. Wood splinters exploded around them as musket balls chewed through their makeshift barricade. Ravencrest. Blackthorn's voice carried over the storm. Last chance. Send out the girl. Go to hell. Tobias roared back, rising to fire again. Shot took one of the attackers in the shoulder, spinning the man around before he toppled off the narrow ledge leading to the cave. For 3 hours. The battle raged across the mountainside. Tobias used every trick learned in 2 decades of wilderness survival, rigged deadfalls that sent rocks tumbling onto the attackers. Used the maze-like cave system to appear and disappear like a ghost, turned his intimate knowledge of the mountain into a deadly advantage. But 7 men with military training were whittling away at his defenses. His ammunition was running dangerously low. Tobias, Evangeline whispered during a lull in the fighting. There's another way out of here, isn't there? A passage that leads to the hot springs. He nodded grimly. But it comes out near the base of the mountain. They'll have men waiting. If we create a distraction, Evangeline's eyes blazed with desperate determination. Start a fire. Make them think we're trying to smoke them out. While they're focused on the main entrance, we slip out the back way. And then what? Can't. Outrun them on foot in this storm. We don't have to outrun them. Evangeline pulled something from her paca, small leather pouch filled with black powder she'd found among his supplies. We just have to reach the old mine shaft you showed me. Eh? The one that's been flooding since the spring rains? Understanding dawned in Tobias's eyes. The abandoned mine shaft sat directly above a natural dam formed by fallen timber and debris. If they could bring down that dam, the whole valley below would flood, he said slowly, including where Blackthorn's horses are picketed, leaving them stranded on foot in a mountain storm, while we know every cave and shelter for 50 miles. Evangeline smiled fiercely. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to change the battlefield. 20 minutes later, smoke began pouring from the cave entrance as the diversionary fire took hold. Blackthorn's men focused their attention on the main opening, expecting a desperate charge or surrender. Instead, Tobias and Evangeline emerged from a hidden fissure 200 yards away, moving like ghosts through the storm-lashed forest. Behind them, their sanctuary burned, but ahead lay the chance for a new beginning. If they could survive the next hour? Ready? Tobias asked as they reached the mine shaft. The black powder charge is already in place. Ready, Evangeline confirmed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Together, they lit the fuse that would either free them forever or doom them both to a mountain grave. The explosion, when it came, shook the earth like the voice of God himself, the roar of cascading. Water drowned out even the thunder as millions of gallons poured through the valley below, sweeping away everything in its path. From their vantage point on the eastern ridge, Tobias and Evangeline watched Blackthorn's camp disappear beneath the torrent, horses and supplies vanishing into the churning brown flood. Jesus and Mary, Tobias breathed, awed by the destruction they'd unleashed. I didn't think it would be that much water. Below them, they could hear shouting as Blackthorn's surviving men scrambled to higher ground. The captain's voice rose above the rest, cursing with creative profanity that would have made a tavern keeper blush. They're alive, Evangeline observed, watching the tiny figures climbing to safety on the far side of the valley. But they'll be walking home to Lancaster in wet boots? Good. Tobias turned away from the spectacle, his pale eyes finding hers in the storm-dim light. Means I won't have their deaths on my conscience. They took shelter in a cave system Tobias had discovered years before, deeper in the mountains and unknown to any other living soul. As Evangeline built up their fire, Tobias secured the entrance and checked their meager supplies. They had enough food for perhaps a week, but winter was coming, and their original sanctuary was ash. What happens now? Evangeline asked as they huddled together for warmth, the storm still raging outside their new refuge. Now we survive, Tobias said simply. Find a new place to build a life, if that's still what you want. You're still trying to give me a way out, Evangeline observed, studying his profile in the firelight. Even after everything we've been through together. Why? Tobias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the wind. Because I'm 46 years old, Evangeline. I've been alone in these mountains for over 20 years. I don't know how to be anything else. Then learn, she turned to face him fully, her green eyes blazing with conviction. Learn with me. Teach me to be the woman who can love a man like you. A man like me? Tobias's laugh was bitter. A hermit who talks to trees and hasn't cut his hair since the French and Indian War. A man who gave up everything for love and spent 23 years punishing himself for caring too much. Evangeline reached up to touch his bearded cheek. A man gentle enough to tend my wounds with his eyes closed, strong enough to hold off. 8 armed men, and brave enough to flood a valley rather than let someone take what's his. Evangeline. I love you, Tobias Ravencrest, she said firmly. Not the legend, not the mountain man, not the ghost story they tell around campfires. I love the man who reads philosophy by firelight and knows the name of every wildflower on this mountain. I love the man who hasn't touched a woman since 1760 because he honored his wife's memory that much. Tobias felt something crack open inside his chest, like ice breaking up in spring. For 23 years, he'd carried the weight of failure and loss, convinced he didn't deserve a second chance at happiness. But looking into Evangeline's eyes, he saw not pity or obligation, but genuine love freely given. I haven't touched a woman since 1760, he repeated slowly, his massive hands trembling as he reached for her. But if you'll have me, if you'll teach me how to love again. Yes, Evangeline whispered, moving into his arms. Yes, to all of it. Yes to you. When Tobias finally kissed her, it was with 23 years of loneliness and longing behind it, gentle as morning dew and fierce as wildfire, all at once. Outside their cave, the storm raged on, but inside, 2 wounded souls found healing. In each other's arms, as they lay together afterward, sharing warmth and whispered promises, Evangeline traced patterns on Tobias's chest with her fingertips. "Where will we go?" she asked. "When spring comes?"
Us.
"Wherever you want," Tobias replied, his voice rusty with emotion. "As long as we go together." Spring arrived early that year, painting the Pennsylvania wilderness in shades of green so vivid they seemed to glow with their own inner light. Tobias and Evangeline emerged from their winter sanctuary stronger and more united than ever, ready to build something new from the ashes of their old lives. They chose a hidden valley 20 miles north of their original home, where a crystal-clear stream fed a natural meadow surrounded by towering pines. It was perfect defensible, fertile, and far enough from any settlement to ensure their privacy while they healed from the wounds of their respective pasts. "Here," Evangeline said definitively, standing in the center of the meadow with her arms spread wide. "This is where we build our life." Tobias smiled, marveling at how she'd changed over the winter months. The frightened girl he'd rescued had transformed into a confident woman who could track game, tend injuries, and hold her own. In any conversation about literature or philosophy, more importantly, she'd taught him that love didn't diminish by being shared, again it multiplied. They worked through the spring and summer with the focused intensity of people who'd found their purpose. Tobias's skilled hands shaped logs into a cabin that was both fortress and home, while Evangeline planned gardens and preserved food for the coming winter. Together they created something neither could have built alone. One evening in late July, as they sat on their completed porch watching fireflies dance over their meadow, Evangeline made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm with child," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Tobias went absolutely still, his cup of herbal tea frozen halfway to his lips. For a moment the only sounds were cricket song and the distant call of a night owl. "Are you certain?" he asked finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Certain as sunrise." Evangeline studied his face, trying to read his reaction. "Esperanza Martinez, you remember? The Mexican woman who trades herbs with you. She confirmed it yesterday when I rode down to the trading post." Tobias set down his cup with hands that shook visibly. "A child. Our child. Are you?" "Pleased?" Evangeline asked, suddenly uncertain. Instead of answering with words, Tobias dropped to his knees beside her chair and pressed his ear to her stomach, his massive frame trembling with emotion. When he looked up, tears tracked through his weathered features. "Pleased doesn't cover it," he whispered. "Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed, but pleased doesn't even begin to touch what I'm feeling right now." "Tell me," Evangeline urged, running her fingers through his hair. "I thought my chance for a family died with Constance and Mary. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone on these mountains, growing old with nothing but regrets for company." He placed his large hands gently over hers on her stomach. "But this... this feels like forgiveness. Like maybe God hasn't given up on me after all." Over the following months, as Evangeline's belly grew round and their love deepened into something unshakable, they made plans for their future. The cabin was expanded to include a nursery. Tobias began trading more regularly with friendly settlements. Slowly rebuilding connections to the outside world, word spread through the frontier network of trappers and traders that the legendary mountain man had taken a wife and was expecting his first child. Some came seeking the truth of the stories, others hoping to trade with the man whose wilderness skills were becoming the stuff of legend once again, but this time, the legend spoke of wisdom and healing rather than violence and madness. "People are calling you the mountain sage now," Evangeline reported one day, returning from a trading expedition with news from the outside world. "They say you can cure any illness, track any animal, survive anything the wilderness throws at you." "And what do they say about you?" Tobias asked, helping her down from her horse with extra care, now that she was heavy with their child. "That I'm the woman who tamed the legendary Tobias Ravencrest?" Evangeline grinned. "We both know that's not quite accurate." "No," Tobias agreed, pulling her into his arms. "You didn't tame me, you saved me. There's a difference." As winter approached and Evangeline's time drew near, they prepared for the greatest adventure of all, bringing new life into their mountain paradise. The pains began on a crystalline December morning, when fresh snow had transformed their valley into a wonderland of white and silver. Evangeline woke with her hand pressed to her back, breathing carefully through the first contractions. "It's time," she told Tobias, who was instantly alert despite having been deep in sleep moments before. "Are you certain?" he asked, though he was already reaching for the supplies they'd prepared months in advance. 23 years of medical knowledge about to be put to the test, Evangeline said with a shaky laugh as another contraction gripped her. "Good thing I trust you more than any city doctor." Tobias had delivered calves, foals, and even helped with human births during his younger years on the frontier. But this was different. This was Evangeline, the woman who'd brought him back too, life carrying their child, their future within her. The labor lasted 14 hours. Through the short winter day and into the star-filled night, Tobias never left her side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her fevered brow with cool cloth, whispering encouragement and love in her ear. "I can see the head," he finally announced, his voice thick with wonder. "Black hair, just like yours." "Just like yours," Evangeline corrected breathlessly. "Our hair is the same color, remember?" With one final push that seemed to draw strength from the very mountains around them, their daughter entered the world teeny, perfect, and loudly announcing her displeasure at being evicted from her warm haven. "She's beautiful," Tobias breathed, cradling the infant with hands that had killed men but now trembled with reverence. "Look at her, Evangeline. Look what we made together." Evangeline, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch their daughter's tiny fist. "What shall we call her?" "Hope," Tobias said immediately. "Her name is Hope Ravencrest, because that's what she is, hope made flesh." As he placed their daughter in Evangeline's arms, Tobias felt the last of his old ghosts finally laid to rest. Constance and Mary would always hold a place in his heart, but they belonged to his past. Hope and Evangeline were his future, his redemption, his reason for greeting each new dawn with gratitude instead of regret. 5 years later, their valley had become home to more than just their growing family. Hope had been joined by twin brothers, Storm and River, and their closest neighbors now included 3 other families who'd sought refuge in the mountains under Tobias's protection. What had begun as a hermit's retreat had evolved into a thriving community. "Tell us the story again, Papa," Hope demanded one evening, as the extended family gathered around their massive stone fireplace. At 5, she was already showing signs of her father's intelligence and her mother's determination. "Which story is that, little one?" Tobias asked, though he knew perfectly well which tale she wanted to hear. "The story of how you and Mama met," Hope said solemnly. "The one where the bad men tried to hurt her, but you saved her, and then she saved you right back." Tobias looked across the room at Evangeline, who was nursing their newest addition, a son they'd named Peace. At 31, she was more beautiful than ever, matured into the kind of woman who could deliver a baby in the morning and mediate a land dispute in the afternoon, all while raising their children with wisdom and love. Well, Tobias began, settling Hope on his lap while the twins crowded close. "It all started with an arrow and ended with a love story." As he told their tale once again, embellishing the heroic parts for the children's benefit and glossing over the darker moments, Tobias marveled at the path that had brought them here. A man who'd thought his life was over had discovered it was just beginning. A woman fleeing tragedy had found her true home in the arms of a legendary hermit, outside their warm cabin. Snow fell softly on the mountain peaks, and wolves sang to the winter moon. Inside, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. Tobias Ravencrest finally understood that some stories have endings so perfect they feel like beginnings in disguise. He had touched a woman again, after 60 years of solitude, and she had stayed in his bed and his heart forever, just as he'd always dreamed but never dared believe possible. Their love had transformed to broken souls into something whole and beautiful and eternal, and in the end, that was the greatest legend of all.